A follow-up on Alfie Evans, we talk about Facebook and identity politics and how some pigs are more equal than others. I'm Vong, and this is A Civil Moment. Last week, we spent a lot of time talking about Alfie Evans, and that segment prompted a lot of response. There's a lot of strong emotions, and I wanted to address some of the feedback that I received since then. Some folks suggested that I was letting the hospital and the judge who ruled in that case off the hook, and that I didn't feel that they were culpable. There was at least one person that said that considering the hospital and the judge not being guilty was equal to saying that the guards and executioners in the Holocaust are innocent, since that was the law of the land. We certainly don't want to trivialize the Holocaust, and the danger in comparing anything to Nazis or Hitler is that every argument loses all nuance. Nazis must be stopped. Hitler must be stopped. And when people bring them up, and when people call someone a Nazi or their beliefs Hitler-like, the ability to have civil discourse goes right out the window. Now, there's a moral obligation to stop Hitler. So it's a tactic that you find a lot on the radical left, calling everybody on the right who's conservative, who's libertarian, or even not liberal or progressive enough, not leftist enough, a Nazi. And therefore, that's an excuse. I mean, that's a whole basis of groups like Antifa, anti-fascist. It's okay to punch a Nazi because, well, they're a Nazi. But once you start labeling people that way, suddenly the whole world is full of Nazis and nothing makes sense anymore, which is, ironically, exactly what's happening. You end up just viewing yourself as a victim or your group as a victim, and the system is full of Nazis. It has to be torn down. There's no room to talk, to discuss for rational discussion. Just running around on pure emotive indignation. You're offended by everything. You lash out at everything. And if it sounds like I'm describing the far left, that's exactly what they've become, a caricature of where you head once you view the whole world in this way. But we'll get to that a little bit later. I want to go back to this argument about Alfie Evans. My argument isn't that the hospital or the judge were innocent. My argument was that it was a bad place to place the blame. The argument is that the system that enables and creates the laws under which they operate are the real danger, and in a democracy, there is still time to reverse course. But if we use the Holocaust, since it was brought up, if we use the idea that the executioners and the guards at concentration camps were just doing their job, imagine what would happen if you were to go remove the guards. Let's say you took them out, you imprisoned them, killed them maybe. Let's say you did the same thing for the executioners. You found them, you removed them, you killed them maybe. What would happen in Nazi Germany? What would happen in the concentration camp if you were to do that? You turn around and there's more guards. There are other executioners. There's no shortage of these people who started out years prior as ordinary people, people that had families, had moral values. But once you take the system and you put its oppressive weight on the shoulders of ordinary people, you can convert them or turn them into monsters. And you start doing that by taking away the dignity of the victims. You make them less human. You take away the sanctity and divinity of life, which in this case is exactly what happened to Alfie Evans. His life became something that was no longer in need of protecting. The state felt that it had a right or a role in determining that his life should be cut short. The root cause is the state overstepping its bounds and lying to its citizens about why and how it should be entrusted with power. The hospital and judge absolutely are culpable. They absolutely share blame. But even if you remove them, the law, the system that put those laws in places, the values that drove the people to create those laws, would find easy replacements that would also make the wrong decisions. Because the reality were, if it was just the hospital or just the judge, it would have been reversed. It was not. There are people out there today defending not just the hospital and not just the judge for doing their jobs, but defending the decisions that were made. And that is the warning bell. That is the canary in the coal mine. And that law and that system and that state is still in place to repeat this morally bankrupt miscarriage of justice. And the crazy thing about it, the crazy thing about the Alfie Evans case is not just that it happened, but how people are defending it, how people are defending it on social media. Because in order to defend it, you must believe that the state has greater responsibility and greater control over an individual's life than that individual, or in the case of a 2-year-old, that individual's parents. But what underlies that, what is the undercurrent of that belief, is because a lot of the people who are trying to defend this decision, who are glomming on to whatever arguments are being made in defense of the decisions that were made, are doing it because they view the people who are on the other side, people like myself, people like Alfie Evans' parents, people like the Pope, they view that as coming somewhere from either a religious standpoint or a conservative standpoint or a libertarian standpoint, and those people are the enemy. It doesn't matter what message they are speaking, as long as they are not on the left side or the correct side, they are on the wrong side. So where's this all coming from? I've talked a lot about the idea of bubbles, the idea of echo chambers on the internet, in social media, in our daily lives even. It's harder and harder to find a table where Democrats and Republicans, libertarians and progressives can sit together and break bread and have a civil conversation. It's understandable that no one wants to sit down with a bigot or a white supremacist or an ethno-nationalist and break bread with them, to pretend that there is civil discourse to be had. That's understandable. But the problem is when you view everybody outside of your narrow thinking as someone who is a bigot, then there is no room left to have a conversation. And the problem gets even worse when you consider that free speech itself is under attack. Now when you say things that are disagreeable, they are not just disagreeable. Potentially, they want to be made illegal. They want to force and coerce speech. In the UK, Mark Meechan, who taught his girlfriend's dog to do the Nazi salute when he asked it, "Buddha, do you want to gas the Jews?" might find himself in prison. Is a joke in bad taste? Clearly. If we can't trust the government to be the arbiter of who gets to live or die, now we're asking them to be the arbiter of what is in bad taste, and bad taste sends you to prison? That's where we're headed. Not where we're headed, that's where we are. And yet it's one thing to make a bad joke about a horrible event. We can all recoil a little bit. And yet, have any of us not heard an off-color joke that maybe we laughed at? But even something so clearly offensive, we can compartmentalize that, right? This is something that is so terrible. It's about the Holocaust. It's about the murder of 6 million Jews, 11 million people, about the deaths of over 100 million people during the course of the war. But we can't compartmentalize that, because the moment that you walk back away from that famous phrase, "I wholly disagree with what you say, but will defend to death your right to say it," the moment that we do not believe that free speech and therefore free thought and free action is the absolute most vital right that every individual has, it all comes crashing down. In Canada, Bill C-16, passed in 2016, called an Act to Amend the Canadian Human Rights Act and the Criminal Code. Without getting into the details of the law, that bill does not specifically mandate the use of the proper pronouns, but the law will be adjudicated by the Ontario Human Rights Commission, who said, quote, refusing to use a transgendered person's chosen name, preferred pronoun, or purposely misgendering them is discrimination and could be liable to fines. Others will use that law or that type of law for whatever purpose suits them. If you think that is alarmist, if you think that is going too far, consider this. The law that allowed the judge in the Alfie Evans case to prevent his transport to the Vatican Hospital and allow him to die was called the Children Act of 1989, and nowhere in that law was it spelled out that the government could determine when to stop life support against the will of the child's parents. So where's this coming from? This push for legislation against language that someone might find offensive. Well, here's a source. Last week, Facebook decided that they were going to start implementing a system that ranks news organizations based on trustworthiness. And it promotes or suppresses its content based on that evaluation. Zuckerberg said, quote, we're essentially going to be losing money on doing political ads. Well, that's nice of him. But how are they going to do this? How are they going to sacrifice their political advertising and also promote trustworthy content? Well, the first time through, just massaging the algorithm, suddenly all liberal news outlets saw a 2% increase in traffic. That's not a lot. It's no big deal. But conservative publishers, including Fox or the Daily Caller, not even including the far right-wing stuff from InfoWars or Newsmax or Breitbart, but all conservative publishers lost an average of 14% in traffic. They're not trustworthy any longer. When I said that Facebook was posturing, was looking for an excuse to push its agenda, it sounded alarmist. It sounded nefarious. But what has happened in the intervening time? Well, Cambridge Analytica broke that story about how information was, quote, stolen from Facebook, or rather taken like someone would take an apple pie cooling on a windowsill. But they're not supposed to have that pie. That pie was pie that Facebook had baked for the Obama campaign. It wasn't ever supposed to fall into the hands of Trump's operatives. But that fiasco landed Zuckerberg in front of the Senate, where he said, we'll do something. Perfect political cover to do what is coming now. Zuckerberg says that his company has gathered data on how consumers perceive the different news organizations by asking them to identify whether or not they've heard of them, and then if they trust them. What happens when you ask an echo chamber a question? You're pretty sure you'll know what you'll hear. So his first step was to change the algorithm to start quieting down the voices that are considered conservative. Then the follow-up is to say, well, do you trust these people? But the real issue is that nobody's going to tell them if they trust those organizations, because that's not how people behave. Consider Reddit, another social media organization. Now, the premise behind Reddit is it's an aggregator. They don't own any of their own content. People go on and post links from around the internet, and then there's a voting system on whether or not that content should be seen by other people. The more upvotes something has, the more likely someone else will see it. It will rise to the top of the front page. The more downvotes, the less likely anybody will ever see it. The Reddit rules are very clear when it comes to voting. Quote, if you think something contributes to conversation, upvote it. If you think it does not contribute to the subreddit, or it is posted in or is off topic in a particular community, downvote it. Is that what ends up happening? Not a chance. If someone doesn't like what they see, whether or not it contributes, it gets downvoted to oblivion. That's why the subreddits on Reddit that are dedicated to politics are overwhelmingly left-leaning. The news subreddits are full of links from overwhelmingly left-leaning sites like Salon, the Huffington Post, Vox. When an article from Fox gets posted, it generally gets downvoted into oblivion. Some of that happens to be because a lot of the users of social media happen to be younger people who tend to vote more Democratic, who tend to have more liberal and progressive viewpoints. By itself, there's nothing wrong with that. People are entitled to their views. The issue is that in normal discourse, you are forced to face viewpoints that are not your own. You have to absorb them. You have to deal with them. You have to think them through. But on social media, you can hide them. You never have to face them. Not only that, everyone whose viewpoints, whose comments fit into the hive mind, their comments rise to the top. They get upvoted. Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that at an emotional level, not necessarily at a rational level. If you go and look at the comments on any given topic, the ones that are the highest tend to be the ones that are either funny, people are entertained, or the one that fits the hive mind's narrative. Opposing viewpoints are way down there if you can find them at all. They get downvoted. They never get seen. And back during the election cycle, something worse happened on Reddit. When the Donald Trump subreddit started becoming very popular, when those posts were rising to the top, they changed the algorithm. The Donald subreddit disappeared from the front page of Reddit altogether. And it was done under the guise of hate speech. There's a lot of hate speech on the Donald subreddit. Now, were there idiots posting nonsense? Were there idiots posting racist stuff or stuff inciting violence? Most certainly there was. The moderators did what they could to quell that and to delete those posts. But you get back to the point where nobody's defining what hate speech is. It's just something that might offend somebody, and that's all it took. Now, Reddit, like Facebook, are private companies. They can do whatever they see fit. But I see this as a symptom of a larger problem, an underlying current that runs through our debate on free speech. And why is anybody debating free speech? As I've said before, there is no slippery slope with free speech. There is no gray area. You can either speak freely with no fear or you can't. And on private sites like Facebook and Reddit, there is no guarantee to free speech. You're guaranteed that you won't be jailed for it, but that's where it starts. Because suddenly, in the UK, you can be jailed for it. And in Canada, you might get jailed for it. In our universities here in the United States, you have people that consider misgendering to be hate speech, and you have people pushing hate speech legislation. It doesn't take too far a leap to see that if those things meet, calling someone by the wrong pronoun suddenly becomes hate speech that is criminal. Now, let's not confuse ourselves. If someone wants to call themselves whatever, and you intentionally call them something else with the express intent of making them uncomfortable or ridiculing them, at the very least that's discourteous, but more likely you're being an ass. But being an ass is not illegal. Otherwise our jails would be overflowing. There's this weird dance we're trying to figure out how to do between allowing people whatever personal freedoms that they want, to lead whatever lives that they want, and the idea that someone who doesn't approve of whatever those choices are, someone who doesn't adhere to the same beliefs, can coexist with them. But that's not what's happening. We see time and again that there is elements on the left that want to control what people find to be socially acceptable. And then anybody whose viewpoint doesn't adhere to the same orthodoxy gets labeled, gets marginalized, gets the kind of treatment that Jordan Peterson got from NBC. They interviewed him for an hour, cut it down to about 15 or 20 seconds, called him a hero of the alt-right, and then interspersed it with gems like this.
I think he's dangerous because of the sorts of people that he enables.
Journalist John Semley has criticized Peterson.
Is there an ideological similarity between Jordan Peterson and Donald Trump and his followers?
I would say fundamentally, yes. They both believe in this basic split of winners and losers, of hierarchies being natural.
That's like 5 seconds, and yet there's so much there that needs a response. First of all, comparing Jordan Peterson to anybody in the alt-right, comparing Jordan Peterson to Milo Yiannopoulos is like comparing Jimmy Carter to David Hogg. And then we move into the idea that somehow believing that there are such things as winners and losers is a negative, like we're supposed to pretend those things don't exist, like we don't see that being played out every single day of our lives, both in society, in human culture, and in nature. And then to double down on that and say that hierarchies, not only do they exist, but that they are natural things. And how dare Jordan Peterson believe such a thing? How dare he observe that wolves associate themselves into packs with alphas and lesser animals? How dare he observe that in prides of lions, there are lions that eat first? How dare he observe that in wandering troops of baboons, there are those that eat first, those that eat second, and those that don't get to eat? But humans are better than that, right? If you dig down, that's what they're hoping for. That's what they want to say, that the only reason that there is such a thing as hierarchy, never mind all the proof in the natural world that we can see, never mind that we see it in animals all the way down to crustaceans. Jordan Peterson loves to talk about lobsters putting themselves into hierarchies. But never mind all that. Never mind that that exists. Humans are above that. The idea that humans only have hierarchy because they've been forced on us by capitalism or the patriarchy or whatever overarching idea you want to put as the oppressor to our collective victimhood. But I don't mean our, because I don't believe any of that. And that's all that it takes for me to become part of the oppressing class. I am now a part of the patriarchy because I don't believe that. And as a member of the patriarchy, because I am male and refuse to see that capitalism that has lifted more people out of poverty than any other system in the history of mankind, because I refuse to believe that is an evil, I am now a part of the problem according to them. And if you believe those same things, you are part of the problem too. There is no room for civil discourse, because suddenly whatever identity that I have, it is consumed by my identity as part of the patriarchy. And suddenly, what I am as an individual, who you are as an individual, is not nearly as important as what group you belong to. And more sinisterly, more worryingly, the identity politics that the left plays, increasingly, you don't get a choice about that. It's about the things that you are, not the things that you've done. And you only get to keep the benefits or the perceived benefits or the allowed benefits of that identity if you believe the exact same thing they do. Because if you're black and you jump the shark like Kanye did, you get labeled someone who doesn't care about black people. If you're a woman and you didn't vote for Hillary Clinton, you don't get to be a woman. You were forced into voting that way by your overbearing husband. You don't get to make your own choices. You have no agency because you're an identity, not a person. Suddenly, the far left is now playing the same kind of sick, morally bankrupt game that justified racism, segregation, Jim Crow, slavery. That we have walked so far away from Martin Luther King's dream, where every man should be judged by the content of his character and not by the color of his skin. And we have walked headlong into 1984. We have walked headlong into Animal Farm, where some pigs are more equal than others. And the left dreams of egalitarian society where there is no winner, there are no losers, there are no hierarchies. But where has that ever occurred? And where can that occur without the loss of everything that makes us who we are? Even amongst our artists, some rise to the occasion, some have talent, some build skill. Are we to toss them all aside and say that any child with a crayon produces art of the same quality that Michelangelo spent his whole life perfecting? Are we to pretend that there is no difference in the amount of work someone can choose to contribute to society? That's the thinking behind some of the laws that get proposed. Keith Ellison said in February that he backed the idea of a maximum wage. He said, quote, "If you were to say, look, if you make more than 20 times more than the people who actually make the products and do the services of your company, then we're going to tax you more." Keith Ellison is the deputy chair of the DNC, and he doesn't know that those people already get taxed at a much higher rate. That's how progressive tax works, Keith. This is their dream, that everybody is equal, but some pigs are more equal than others. Every socialist dream ends in a communist nightmare. What socialist country has ever formed where everybody was equal, where we can pretend that there were no hierarchies? Because while Stalin may have called them comrades, he was the one in the palace eating when they were in the gulag. And in his dream for a hierarchy-less society, Pol Pot rounded up everyone who was a professional or intellectual or anyone who had an education and murdered them all, anywhere from 1.4 million to 2.2 million. And Pol Pot himself? He was an educated man with a taste for French literature, but some pigs are more equal than others, and we needn't go into the history of China or North Korea or the current horrors in Venezuela. But here are all societies that were proposed to be without hierarchy, that where all men were not only guaranteed equal opportunity, but equal outcome. And yet, in a country where there was supposed to be equal outcome, the only equal outcome for millions was that they died or starved to death. And they all had leaders, wealthy and powerful, and decidedly not equal, or at least more equal than the rest. It seems so far away. It seems such a radical leap. It seems alarmist. But we trace the steps from something benign, like, let's not hurt each other's feelings. And let's not. Let's not. But let's not make it illegal if someone else were to take offense at something stupid that we might say. Because the next step is what has happened in the UK, where a stupid joke lands you in prison. That we can recognize that our desire for more equality, for more opportunity, for a better outcome for those who want it. And let us not pretend that everybody can be a doctor. Let us not pretend that there aren't millions who, under any circumstance, under the best circumstances, could not hope to find even our least glamorous jobs, but who also deserve the right to the pursuit of happiness and the pursuit of meaning. On the left, on the far left, you have those who want to pretend that reality isn't what it is, that there are no such things as hierarchies, even though they surround us and we see them every day, that people's intelligence, ability, drive are different, and people approach problems differently and solve them differently, some better than others. But let us also not fall into the trap of those on the right who would say, those who have failed, those who have been left behind, have not sufficiently pulled themselves up by the bootstraps enough. Because certainly, while there are plenty of people who have chosen not to attain their potential, in fact, I would say most of us have yet to live up to our potential. And we should work towards that end every day. There are people who are doing the best they can, and that best is still not good enough. And those people demand of us something better, even if they themselves are not the ones voicing the demands. Whether it come from our morality to do the right thing, or whether we choose to approach it from pragmatism and understand that those people who are in that group are a destabilizing force in our society and our culture. It is so tempting to turn our backs on the cause of the downtrodden because their cause and their victimhood has been usurped by the far left. But we should not give in to that temptation. But neither should we idly sit and pretend what is happening is not happening until it's too late. We see the signs in our social media, we see the outcomes in our laws, and we see a potential future in our history. Edmund Burke said, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." And something can be as little as civil discourse and the presentation of ideas and the willingness to be offended and to grow as people. As I record this, it's very likely that within 24 hours, President Trump will scrap the Iran deal. We will probably cover that in some detail next week. But I leave you with this. If we view the Iran nuclear deal as merely the cessation, or rather, more importantly, just the pausing of Iran's nuclear program. Last week, we talked about how Iran merely moved and hid its nuclear program. In the meantime, Iran is building up a ballistic missile capability, which makes perfect sense. You get the sanctions lifted, you restart your economy, you pause but not stop, nor abandon your nuclear weapons program, while you get the other part of the program up to speed, which is the delivery mechanism, and then you flaunt the deal at your leisure when you can combine both of them to become a real regional threat. And let's not also forget that part of this deal was consummated with pallets of cash. The Obama administration delivered literally pallets of cash to the Iranians. At least $400 million and maybe up to $1.7 billion in cash. They weren't quite clear about that. When asked why they did that, they said, "Our sanctions are so effective, they are completely cut off from the banking system." If that sounds as ridiculous to you as it does to me, consider also that pallets of untraceable cash is a pretty good way to arm and fund terrorists. In lighter news, a supposedly extinct kangaroo rat, believed to have been extinct for 30 years, has suddenly been spotted, and not one, but 4. The 4 little critters got themselves caught in scientist survey traps in Baja California. They hadn't been seen by science for over 30 years. If they were thinking about heading north, they should start now. It's a long way to hop before that wall comes up. If you've enjoyed this program or found it informative or enlightening, please subscribe. The Civil Moment podcast is new, and your support and involvement is greatly appreciated and absolutely vital if we are to continue doing this. Listen to our podcast on iTunes or SoundCloud and leave a review. Our audio is now also available on YouTube. Follow us on social media at Facebook or Twitter. Like and share our podcast announcement. It all helps. You can contact us by sending an email to podcast@civilmoment.com or visiting us on our website at www.civilmoment.com. Thank you. Until next time, I'm Vong, and this has been A Civil Moment. This podcast, copyright 2018, Phase Final Incorporated.